On this channel, we're always talking about PC hardware and gaming benchmarks. We've tested a lot of different hardware, different configurations, and settings to find out how to attain optimal performance. Going through all this testing, I wanted to talk to you guys about the complexities of benchmarks and why you as a consumer should have it in your best interest to attain as much info as possible. Trusting just one or two sources of info can potentially lead to skewed perceptions of a component's performance. Let's discuss that in this video. This video is brought to you by Applemaker and their TH80 Pro. The TH80 Pro is a nice compact 75% mechanical keyboard, providing versatility, comfort, and space efficiency. It features a programmable metal rotary knob which allows you to seamlessly control your audio and doubles up for other shortcuts. Along with that, you get great quality PBT keycaps, their custom flamingo switches which come pre-lubed, and tuned stabilizers which are also lubed from the factory. The keyboard's case is robust and there's also pre-installed sound dampening foam. Putting that all together, you get a board which sounds amazing out of the box. What's also nice is that you can connect this board using three methods: Bluetooth 5.0, an included 2.4 GHz dongle, or a USB-C cable, along with support for both Mac and Windows. In addition, you also get south-facing RGB LEDs, allowing you to customize your board the way you want. Check out Applemaker and their TH80 Pro keyboard using the link in the video description. Hey, what is going on guys? Danny here, welcome back to the channel and I hope you've all been doing well. As PC gamers and hardware enthusiasts, we often find ourselves immersed in the world of FPS, frame times, clock speeds, high-medium settings. These metrics are the lifeblood of our gaming experiences, shaping how we interact with our favorite titles. But what is our definitive goal? Are we seeking an immersive experience where we can lose ourselves in the game? Do we crave stunning visuals that push our hardware to the limits? Or do we strive for lightning-fast FPS that keeps us competitive in the gaming arena? While most of us would agree that the primary aim is to enjoy our games, it's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of performance. So that's what I wanted to talk to you guys about today. We're going to delve into this quote-unquote performance trap and explore why it's crucial to approach benchmarks and hardware reviews with a discerning eye, along with discussing why it's crucial you attain an aggregate from multiple sources rather than just one. I was prompted on making this video because I wanted to highlight to you guys the importance of taking into consideration how benchmarking PC hardware and games has become an increasingly complex task due to the multitudes of variables involved. Since I started this channel, and even before that, a large part of the PC gaming hobby for me was tinkering around with different configurations and seeing how they impacted performance and finding what worked the best for my needs. That may not be as relatable to some of you who might just say, screw that, give me the hardware, let me play my game, and that's fine with me. But for me, it's enthralling to see how if I've applied an undervolt and power limit to a GPU, how that will affect my FPS and how that also correlates to power, or if I've raised my system's memory frequency but loosened the timings, what kind of impact it has on performance. Every change brings new insights, and I find that to be fun in its own way. When I started this channel, I really didn't have a whole lot of hardware to play around with, and resources were limited. You can go back and take a look at some of the earlier uploads on the channel. In 2016 is where I became more active with it, and back then I was using an R9 390 and i5 6600K. That system served as my personal gaming rig, editing machine, and my test bench. But even then, I had made many videos surrounding topics like overclocking the GPU, the CPU, how certain games performed at the time at different resolutions, graphics settings, how the games performed with an overclock applied, so those kinds of different topics. Back then, I found the world of benchmarking to be straightforward, but it was also because I was just scratching the surface. As time went on and I became more and more aware of different variables, different things to test, discovered new technologies arising that could drastically impact performance, I've come to this realization I had to look at info with a critical eye, and that nowadays you really have to be cautious about the information you're looking at and the conclusions you come up with. Ultimately, if you can test things for yourself, then that's really the way to go, so you eliminate all sorts of doubt towards other people's setups, and those numbers are directly applicable to your specific situation. Now, we brought up different test parameters, and one of those being overclocking. overclocking. When it comes to overclocking, I often see that there are two camps here. One that says, I don't even want to look at a BIOS screen, I'm fine with out-of-the-box numbers. The other side that has users who want to get the most out of their hardware through overclocking. If it wasn't obvious to you already, I often find myself in the latter group, so when I look at review outlets that test out-of-the-box configurations, I personally tend to take their numbers with a grain of salt because I'm left wondering what would have happened if those parts they were using were tuned or overclocked to the max. For example, on a modern Intel CPU, you can overclock the P cores, the E cores, and also the ring clock. On AMD side, not so much, but you get stuff like curve optimizer, which can potentially impact performance. Obviously, with overclocking, your mileage may vary due to the silicon lottery, but depending on how far you can take your CPU, that will dictate the uplift in performance you get. So comparing a stock 13900K to a stock 7950X3D doesn't tell me the full story. Speaking of curve optimizer, both platforms have auto overclocking features available, which many motherboard manufacturers have enabled by default. AMD has precision boost overdrive, and on Intel you've got multi-core enhancement. Should they test with them disabled or enabled? What if someone has it enabled on one platform but not the other, and it skews the results? What about default power limits? When it comes to test benches, the way those are set up and the objective you can have will also vary drastically. One standard that's often practiced by many reviewers is to equalize as many variables as possible. So for example, when testing CPUs, and let's just assume they're all compatible with DDR5. I've seen reviewers test with just DDR5 6000 CL30 memory, which for AMD is some of the best you can get, but on Intel you can go above that, and not too long ago I made a video showcasing some benchmarks from a wide variety of games using different RAM configurations on my 13700K, along with tuned RAM timings. In some games you'd see a pretty large uplift as opposed to using the standard DDR5 6000 memory with just XMP enabled, because your bandwidth is significantly higher and also you get lower memory latency. So I wouldn't be holding back a CPU with slower memory just because the other competing part can't push memory further. Again, it doesn't tell me the full story. Don't get me wrong, I'm not calling those numbers incorrect, because they are right. Those are the numbers they have obtained based on their setup. However, what you can see is that if one reviewer is opting to use out-of-the-box or stock configurations, whereas the other reviewer will be maxing out and tuning the setups, you'll find they may reach totally different conclusions despite them both using the exact same hardware, which will therefore lead to a different recommendation. Both approaches are valid, but they cater to different audiences and can lead to different outcomes. This doesn't just apply to CPUs, but it can also be applied to GPUs as well. Reviewing GPUs I find to be pretty hard to mess up. As long as you make that component the main bottleneck of the system, you'll find valid results. Hence, higher resolutions come into play there, but you still want to ensure you've got a fast enough CPU, or at least one of the fastest. So when I had reviewed my RTX 4090 last year, at the time I was using a 5800X, not even a 5800X 3D for my test system. Sure, it was a bit overclocked and had tuned DDR4 3800 CL14 BDI memory, but afterwards I felt like I had made a mistake, and not too long after had updated the test bench with a 13700K, and I'm glad I did. I followed up with a retest video, and at 4K this really didn't matter too much, but you can see how at lower resolutions there was a huge gap, and at that time the 13700K was fresh into the test bench. It was lazy tuned, and the RAM was only running at 6400 mega transfers with XMP timings, so I had even more headroom there. The point here is that I did see a few other reviewers as well that did make this mistake, and you could see it in the results that the 4090, it just didn't look as impressive as it did in reviews that were using a more competent CPU, which again can lead to vastly different conclusions. I had also followed that video up with another head-to-head showdown between the 4090 and 3090 with a larger benchmark suite, because I wanted to showcase just how far apart the GPUs were when benchmarked properly. Now, what we've discussed so far are hardware configurations, but we also cannot forget about software technologies and different setups in this area, one of those being resizable bar. Now, I've tested resizable bar a few times, and it seems to be a tech that's hit or miss. The results I've gotten with resizable bar haven't been anything drastic. However, I've only tested with nvidia GPUs on both AMD and Intel platforms. When dealing with a Radeon GPU, AMD has smart access memory, which is essentially the same thing but with some of their own tweaks. And when you pair an AMD GPU with an AMD CPU, you can use smart access memory, and you do see a larger uplift, which makes sense. But now imagine if a reviewer benchmarked a bunch of GPUs and they did it on an AMD platform with resizable bar enabled. Now you can argue whether that's unfair or not. I personally don't think there's really a wrong answer here, because if you've got an AMD GPU and CPU, then of course you're going to want to enable it so those benchmarks are applicable to you. But the point here is that you might see varying results from different reviewers if some choose to test with resizable bar on, or test with it off, or if they had tested with an Intel platform. What about HAGS? Hardware Accelerated GPU Scheduling is a feature introduced by Microsoft in Windows 10. It allows the GPU to manage its own memory directly, which can potentially improve performance and reduce latency in certain scenarios. However, when it comes to benchmarking, the use of HAGS can introduce another variable into the mix. If a reviewer enables HAGS during their tests, it might give an advantage to certain GPUs that can effectively utilize this feature, and some would be at a disadvantage which they cannot. On the other hand, if HAGS is disabled, it might not fully represent the potential performance of these GPUs. Let's dive into the world of upscaling technologies, which can then add another layer of complexity when it comes to benchmarks. Upscaling technologies like NVIDIA's DLSS, which stands for Deep Learning Supersampling, and AMD's FSR, Fidelity FX Super Resolution, have become game changers in the realm of PC gaming for many. They use an advanced algorithm to upscale lower resolution images in real time, providing a significant boost in performance while maintaining image quality. For instance, if a reviewer uses NVIDIA's DLSS for their benchmarks, it will give NVIDIA GPUs an advantage over AMD GPUs that don't support DLSS in certain titles which have only DLSS in it. Similarly, you might find AMD's FSR is going to be favoring AMD GPUs. These days, many gamers are turning upscaling on, and many devs are suggesting an upscaling preset depending on what your resolution and performance target is. So if I was to benchmark a wide variety of games and had DLSS or FSR enabled, I take it many people would be okay with it, since many of you told me you do turn it on. The same can also be said for frame generation too. Maybe not to the same extent, but it's definitely in the same state that upscaling was back in 2018 when it was introduced. Approached with a lot of skepticism, but over time as the tech matured, people became more and more accepting of it. What about ray tracing? A lot of games coming out these days also have ray tracing available as an option. Some games like Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition have it baked in as the default rendering method. But as GPUs are becoming faster and more advanced, they're becoming more capable at handling these technologies to enhance overall visual fidelity. So people going for a more realistic look are opting to turn it on, but of course that still comes with a pretty hefty performance penalty. Do you guys realize how bad and one-sided the GPU market would look if going forward, reviewers said that since ray tracing is basically included with every game coming out now, we're just going to treat this as the new meta for ultra settings? And one could argue that for higher end GPUs that cost $1,000 plus, including ray tracing in benchmarks, not even a separate segment, seems fair, because at that price point you're expecting the GPU to be pretty capable at handling it. And since we're on the subject of settings, you may want to consider what kind of settings the reviewers are using. Some reviewers will choose to benchmark with the ultra quality preset and call it a day to push the hardware as much as they can. I kind of disagree with that, because I personally think running ultra settings is dumb, and you'd get a much better experience from a mixture of medium and high settings with a lot of the post-processing crap turned off. You get much better performance and the visuals aren't dramatically downgraded. And that's also how I benchmark most of my games, or if I'm using a preset, I at least make sure to disable most of the post-processing. You may also want to consider what operating system they're using. I know plenty of people who have switched over to Windows 11, and some who refuse and will be staying on Windows 10 until it's supported. I've tested this as well and found certain games favored one OS over the other. Along with that, background processes can also factor in the numbers attained. I think most reviewers would test on a clean install with minimal background apps running, but that may not be realistic, as you could have apps like Discord, Spotify, Firefox playing a YouTube video, and more, which need their own resources and can potentially impact the game's performance. Now, I could go on endlessly about all the different testing methodologies, variables, and parameters that are involved when doing hardware and gaming benchmarks, but then this video would go on forever. But taking into account what we've discussed so far, I'm sure you have a good idea now on what I was trying to highlight in the beginning of the video when I said that taking information from one source and basing your conclusion off of that probably isn't the best idea. And this isn't to undermine anyone else's work. There are a lot of great reviewers out there that do an excellent job at providing great data, but there are just so many scenarios out there, so many, you just really can't expect them to cover everything. So when you're looking at benchmark results or reading hardware reviews, reviews, remember to consider the context, understand the differences between the testing methodologies, consider how it aligns with your own use case. The variance between different reviewers and websites can be quite significant due to these different factors. Therefore, it's crucial for consumers, PC gamers, and hardware enthusiasts to approach PC hardware reviews with caution and a critical eye. These days, it's so essential to understand its complexities and the limitations. Remember, no single review can definitively determine a component's performance. It's always best to look at multiple reviews to get an aggregate understanding of how the specific component will perform. Alrighty guys, so that's gonna do it for this one. We'll touch base in the next video. Until then, happy gaming and benchmarking. If you guys found this video to be informative and entertaining, then leave a like. Let me know your thoughts and comments down below. Be sure to check out the video description for cool links and ways to support the channel, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. And if you're interested in seeing more content like this, then consider subscribing. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.